You're listening to a classic business podcast as heard on Classic 102.7. 102.7.
There are few more important burning issues in South Africa at the moment, and indeed across the creative industry, than youth unemployment and skills development and growing SMEs. The South African unemployment rate jumped to 32.5% in the last quarter of last year, thanks to COVID and our structural issues in the South African economy. But youth unemployment was up at 63.2%. And it is a national crisis. But I recently came across a very exciting concept that is turning this challenge on its head and into one of the most compelling opportunities to harness the likes of BEE and marketing spend to solve for this and also support small businesses at the same time, which in the wake of the pandemic, I think must be everyone's priority at the moment. It's called Sum of 21, and I've got the brainchild behind it, Janhendrik Oosthuizen, the CEO of creative agency Etiket on the line, and Roxanne de Matta Goncalves, who's a director at Strata-g Labour Solutions and MD at Be the Change. That's BEE the Change, to talk about the model over the course of the next month. In fact, we're going to explain how the model works to address one of these apex challenges in the country. But in this first conversation, I really want us to spend a bit of time on the unemployment crisis and the tools that we've at least got in the current framework to address it. We've just entered into a partnership with you both, so it's really great to have you on the show, and welcome. Firstly, Roxanne, tell me a little bit more about Strata-g Labour Solutions, because you're really in the trenches here when it comes to understanding the issues around youth unemployment.
Hello, Michael, and thank you for the introduction. Strata-g Labour Solutions has been in existence for the past 12 years, and we have been fortunate enough to engage in transformation solutions with some of the largest market players in across several industries. And we put together strategies that help companies transform at a sustainable rate and find them solutions and strategies that tie into the core competencies of their business, so that transformation and BEE impact in itself is sustainable through those organizations.
And I think that is critical here in this conversation, is sustainable solutions, because I think recruiting the best possible human capital, the best people, is one of the most critical determining factors of any organization's success. And when you look at this crisis of youth unemployment through that lens, I think it really should be keeping us all up at night. Just how bad is the youth unemployment crisis from where you're sitting?
The statistics are quite frightening, Mike, and to your point in terms of the statistics that you featured, it's such a moving target, it's such a rapid rate that it's almost impossible to get accurate figures. But if you're looking as much as 62%, that is an alarming figure. And the strategies that are being placed through organizations or in partnership with organizations today are just not sustainable. They focus on learnerships, which essentially perpetuate professional learners instead of employable youth. They also turn programs into youth employment for short-term periods, and they don't necessarily focus on long-term employment, which means these individuals do not get sufficient exposure and business acumen in order to actually create a decent working quality individual. And that is alarming, because organizations cannot absorb entry-level employees at the rate at which they are creating them. So therefore, they just keep on getting churned in and out of the system in terms of going from one learnership to the next.
And it's a system that isn't working. It's because of that churn, just chewing the youth up and spitting them back out into unemployment again. And that is the problem. Janhendrik, to bring you in, Etiket is an independent, award-winning brand and advertising agency. How did you start out?
Mike, we started out about 13 years ago, and I think one of the big things and the cornerstones of us in the advertising industry, and specifically with regards to what Etiket does, is the whole drive of providing a positive human impact. Everything that we do is all about creating a human impact, and we work with our clients and we work with the projects that our clients are engaged in to do exactly that, to make sure that that we create a positive human impact for everything that we do. And from an internal point of view as well, whenever we do a project in the industry or as a company, that is our guiding positioning, is that positive human impact.
And it gives one a purpose and a central compass through which to conduct business. And one has to be extremely mindful of the environment in which business is conducted in South Africa. It's one of the big themes that we've been addressing on the show over the last several months. In fact, ever since the pandemic started, we've been raising the flag on this widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. We're seeing it come through in terms of governments cracking down, increasing taxes. In the US, we see Biden certainly going after the wealthy, and it's going to go and diffuse throughout the world in terms of increased pressure on business, on society to act, to help tackle some of these challenges. And Janhendrik, if you look at this through the lens of the creative industry, as an independent agency, where is the next creative talent coming from? How concerning is this youth unemployment crisis to you?
That's where it becomes extremely interesting. And a little bit earlier, you mentioned the structural problems that we have with regards to the economy. And we see it so often in the creative industry. We just don't have enough skills. We don't have the hands that's required to do all the work that is required from an advertising, marketing, as well as creative perspective. And it's not that we don't have the skill sets out there. We do have the skills. We just don't have that stepping stone, the opportunity that the youngsters need to really be employable in the creative and advertising and marketing industries. So there's a lot of work and a big gap that needs to go into taking these youngsters, the raw talent, and develop them so that they are ready for the work environment, and to position them in such a spot that they are employable as they are moving into the industry.
And to Roxanne's earlier point as well, I think programs are being designed that are not entirely fit for purpose in terms of the addressing the right skills gap, and they're designed for a particular cohort of students, and also there does seem to be a lot of box ticking, and that kind of approach is never going to deliver a desired outcome. If you look at the spirit of the legislation, and let's move on to that, Roxanne, in terms of the spirit of the legislation in South Africa, we've got our labour laws and the new BBBEE codes. Well, they're newish. They're getting a bit dated now. We've got skills development, we've got the Employment Equity Act. All of those are there to help, but I think often they can leave employers feeling a little frustrated, a little uncertain on what are the best decisions to make in the interests of their business. And as I said earlier, recruiting the best people is really one of those critical success factors. So let's start with the new BBBEE codes. How do they actually seek to address the youth unemployment problem?
The codes themselves, Michael, have merit in terms of theoretical addressing of the issues, but where the flaw comes in is actually the practicality behind it. I feel that some organizations have a very short-term view in that they live from scorecard to scorecard, which is essentially an auditing process which is based on your financial year. But if one looks at the spirit of the Act and the intent behind the legislation, they've set out targets financially to be able to assist organizations and assist communities through making financial contributions. But where there is a flaw in the strategy in terms of implementation is, I feel that organizations, whilst they have a good guideline in line with the scorecard, they fail to understand what the small organization requires in terms of support. So, in the spirit of commerce and business in terms of a South African context, is we do a lot of business on a handshake and by referral and through vouching for each other's organizations and brands.
Yeah.
And whilst there is a great intent and of course, purpose behind the financial injection behind these small organizations, where organizations, or rather sponsoring measured entities, fall short is they're not embracing the true spirit behind EE, which is to essentially mentor the small business or engage with the small business by allowing them to add value within their circle and their supply chain, and mentoring them into a position where they are comfortable enough to refer them forward, to help them grow their client base and connect them with businesses where they can further add value and carry on commercial engagement and relationships through that. Because the business itself cannot live sustainably by living hand to mouth and getting donations from organizations in that manner. It would have to come from an ongoing relationship or an ongoing client base that the measured entity is assisting in terms of growing their client base.
And I think that relationship element, it seems like such a soft element, but that to me is the hardest element to get right. And, I'm reminded if we bring this back to training and upskilling, and Janhendrik, I think companies are often very apprehensive about training staff because they think, well, if we train them, we're going to lose them once they've reached a higher level of competency. But I'm reminded of that old joke about a manager saying to his boss, well, what happens if we train them and they leave? To which the CEO says, yes, but what happens if we don't and they stay? But why are we seeing the current approach to mentoring and training on the job in the creative industry seldom having the desired effect in an agency? Is it just that people are too busy to go out and actually do the hand-holding?
To a large degree, yes, Michael. And the reality is twofold. If we look at the creative environment, and so within any corporate environment as well, the reality is most professional people are not teachers by nature. They don't per se have the drive to guide, to mentor, to teach, to assist. They want to focus on what they are good at, and they want to do their jobs. They do not have the time per se in a busy day, in a busy schedule to look after a youngster and to really guide a youngster. And the reality, and specifically in the creative industry, is we are a deadline-driven environment, which means that my senior staff needs to reach a deadline and they need to produce the outcome that is required at a certain point. And if they have to choose between working towards that deadline and reaching the deadline and babysitting a youngster, they're going to focus on the deadline because their KPIs are based on that, which basically means that they don't have the time nor the inclination to really look after these youngsters. And we see it so often. These youngsters end up making coffee and photocopies, and we're starting to waste their time because they just don't get the energy that's required to really stimulate their growth and their development.
And that's the problem. I think we've articulated that loud and clear, and clearly a present danger unless we will start bringing our piece of the puzzle to solve it. And that's why I'm really looking forward to discussing that particular solution of Sum of 21 with you next week. Janhendrik Oosthuizen, CEO of Etiket, and Roxanne de Matta Goncalves, Director at Strata-g Labour Solutions. Thanks so much for your time. If we have a look at the National Development Plan, it certainly recognises that the future of the country depends on youth who are employed and empowered to contribute to the country's economic growth. And currently, we're not delivering that. Next week, we're going to zoom in on Sum of 21's very unique approach of harnessing transformation through skills development. It's got a very innovative learnership and internship model, very innovative funding model, and it all comes together to provide a rather big piece to solving the youth unemployment puzzle here in South Africa.